When I was making these videos, I was obviously going over like how many like tech videos I want to talk about, business type videos, anything nerd related, or how can I translate tech concepts in a nerdy way that makes them easier to understand and all that other stuff, right? And I came across a subject, or rather I recalled a subject that I find to be very like problematic. Something else that I'm worried about, like on a social note. And I think what I'm gonna try to do from this point on is for every group of videos that I upload, that I'm going to include one that focuses on, even if it's either directly or indirectly business related, but or maybe even just social related, but maybe something related to society that is a big deal, and something that I think we should make a point to address, that maybe it doesn't affect business in the here and now, but it can later. And the thing I want to talk about today, which I've seen all over the place from months, from teachers, other content creators, people talking about, and I'm just going to put my bid into this subject, is the falling literacy rate of primarily grade school kids, like elementary school kids. But there seems to be a decline in literacy in general, which is not good for a multitude of reasons, which we'll get into. But we already have an issue with people not being financially literate as it is. Finance is hard to understand, and that's why like some of the videos I made, if I choose to upload them, I talked about that a bit so that you know my experience when I had to buy my car and some of the finance stuff I had to learn. You guys can learn through my experience with that, especially if you haven't gone through that type of process yet. And we can build on that over time because I don't know everything. Some of these videos I make to help me learn stuff, or I reflect on the stuff I learned, and I just talk about how I managed to wrap my head around it. And you guys can do your own version of that as well, just to give you guys an idea, right? So, I think I want to talk about this falling literacy rate and go over, give it a quick summary, but also talk specifically about why, in my mind, why it's problematic for the future if these numbers are accurate, and if this decline continues if we don't make it a point to reverse it. So, as far as the literacy crisis that we are facing, primarily when it comes to, I want to say, Gen Alpha, the youngest group of kids that are, in school, in grade school, I want to say that they are in high school now, or that's either the younger half of Gen Z or the older half of Gen Alpha. But definitely like elementary schoolers, middle schoolers for sure. There's It's been going on for a couple years now, where a lot of people, many young teachers, have taken to social media and their platforms, amongst other issues, like the music they're listening to. But they've been talking about how, like, I have eighth graders that still can't read and do basic math and things past a fourth grade level, right? And that's a pretty bad deal for a number of reasons. So, according to the Education Trust, I'm going to read the stats directly. According to the Education Trust, less than half, 43% to be exact, of fourth graders, and we're referring to last year, 2023, were able to read on or above their grade level. So, less than half of fourth graders, on average, I guess, in the United States of America, were able to read on their grade level or above that. Black American kids came out at 17%. Latin American kids came at 21%. 11% of kids with disabilities, which I'm going to translate that as neurodivergency, I'm guessing, and 10% for multilingual kids, which is a little different in my opinion. It's kind of known that when you learn to, if you know like two, three languages, because a lot of people, it's cool to us to be multilingual. It sounds cool on paper and stuff like that. But it's actually very common for people who know how to speak more than one language, especially if they know three or more, to stumble across their words, because it's like they're constantly translating different words in their mind, even if, like, whether it's at the drop of a dime, they have to switch from English to Spanish and then maybe switch from Spanish to Mandarin or something like that. And their brain just works, constantly when it comes to translating that. And some words in different languages sound super similar. So they may say a Spanish word in replacement of an English word, stuff like that. Um, so I don't know if that necessarily falls in the same basket, but they did include that. So, we'll include that. So the key detail in this crisis is the worry that these kids are being sent to school without being taught how to read in advance. And I'm going to talk about that at large later on in this video. So, some of the issues that teachers are seeing that can result in the fall of literacy or are contributing to the decline in literacy with kids today. So one thing I do want to keep in mind that kids are kids, you know. I have a nephew, I have some friends, some very close friends. We're practically family at this point. I call them part of my chosen family. They have a son, and I just saw them a little over a month ago before I made my move, and he just turned 5, right? And he's articulate. He can speak very well. He can get his thoughts across pretty well, but he's 5. I'm not, if he has moments where he kind of stumbles, on his words, I'm not gonna get crazy about it. I don't know his parents. I don't think they would either. They're not like that. I don't expect no kid that's like 5, even 6, 7, or 8, to be able to talk like Einstein and all that stuff. It's just not realistic. So, kids not being able to talk like a living, walking, breathing SAT test is fine with me. But there should be, once they're able to speak and once they're able to, say full sentences, assuming neurodivergency is not part of the equation, of course, that they're able to get their thoughts across in a way that, fits the phase of life that they are in, right? And I know for everyone that's different, access to resources are different, socioeconomic stances are different. And these are all details that matter. I don't want to overlook that at all. So I do want to keep that in mind. Like, kids are going to be kids. However, there is a growing concern that communication that even suits the level of these kids on the elementary school level, even when they're just at home, they're not even reaching those levels of communication, right? Like, even a fourth grader or fifth grader is not able to communicate in the way that suits their age. Again, they don't have to be like Einstein. They don't have to be able to speak like me at my age, and I'm almost 30. They don't have to. But there's levels that they are expected to reach that shows like they are progressing what is considered I guess linearly, or I guess in a more natural fashion, or I guess normal fashion. And I know that's kind of a weird thing to say because it's different for everybody. That's why you have the whole thing of reading at a certain grade level and being able to speak and read and write at certain grade levels to track that progress, because as you get older, there is going to be like a social narrative, or kind of a social programming, where people, they see you, they can see you're a certain type of age, or if you tell them how old you are and what grade you're in, and if you're in college and stuff like that, they may expect you to know certain terminology already. They may expect you to be able to verbally communicate, assuming, again, no speech impediments, no neurodivergency is in place. They expect you to be able to communicate yourself effectively off top. Like, there's really no excuse for it. I remember when I first went to college and undergrad, and I met this girl. We were friends like pretty much all throughout undergrad, and I didn't hear the word verbatim my entire life until I went to college in my freshman year, and I met her, and we were talking, and she used that word, and she was like, "You have to learn how to say this verbatim." I'm like, "Verbatim? What's that mean?" She's like, "You've never heard that word? Come on, dude!" Like, she wasn't trying. Like, the way I'll say it is going to be off, but she was like, "You're gonna have to get used to hearing that word, because you're gonna start hearing that a lot." But it's surprising that you haven't heard that yet. She kind of got that point across. So, don't roast me. But yeah, up until college, I never heard the term verbatim. And people, if it wasn't for her, I probably would have made a fool of myself, in other spaces, because she was right. Once I got into that space, I started hearing that term and other terminology a lot more often that I had not heard up to that point. But people were able to just assume like they knew what these people were talking about. Like, I felt like I was the only one who didn't know what certain terms and things meant. So it's important to be consistent when it comes to teaching your kids how to identify certain things, what words mean, how, to imagine it if they're not able to get the, black and white textbook or dictionary definition of it, stuff like that. Because once they get old enough, whether they're in college, whether they're working by themselves as an adult, all that stuff, there is going to be a population of people that's going to see them as an adult, find out what grade they're in, find out if they're in college, whatever, and they'll just assume things. And when they don't meet those standards, they may not get certain opportunities. They get looked at a certain type of way. Believe it, like, people are mean, dude, especially young adults and kids. Like, kids are brutal. You'll get shunned for the smallest things. So, and I'm not even saying use popularity and things as the main reason, but personally or professionally, like, being able to keep your kids up when it comes to their academic ability or the educational ability, partially in this case with reading and writing on grade level, it has its place. But let's move forward. So to piggyback off of that, I am concerned about the lack of literacy that I'm worried that it'll lead to even a harder time of people understanding each other, understanding social anxieties and understanding social cues. Because, some people as they get older, they will be able to fill in those gaps by themselves. My bookworm gene kicked in very late. It kicked in towards the end of my time in undergrad when I was living back home. I get that from my mom's side. She was like that growing up. And so I still don't read books like crazy, but I read. And even when I don't read books, I like to just read like articles and stuff. I just read in general. Actual books, I tend not to read as much, but I've always been a reader. I've always been the type to like read articles and stuff. But in terms of reading books, that didn't kick in until later. It's some people, will get it at their own pace for sure, and they'll fill those gaps. Some kids have been bookworms their entire lives. It suits who they suit. At the other side of that coin, there's a reason why there's that worry of you don't want to be 30, 40 something years old and don't know how to read and write and don't know how to communicate, you know, functionally as you should at that age, or how people perceive you should at that age, right? It's a real thing. And it looks like we're heading toward that direction even more than we already are. Social media has already done a number on us when it comes to social anxiety, social cues not being, as easy to acknowledge, people being more reserved to themselves. I've always been an introvert, but I'm sure social media has done its number on me as well. And it's affected everyone probably as similar, but also a little bit differently. I'm worried that in tandem with that, because Gen Alpha is the first generation that was born into the modern version of what technology is, with artificial intelligence and you know uh technology, where I just saw something on Instagram the other day, or I think it was Twitter, where people can write like an equation like 20 times 55, and it's like this smart blackboard that'll do the math for them. And it's like technology is helpful, but something like that is just a hindrance, like through and through. Like a calculator for an exam, but your parents still made you actually do the calculations at home, or your teacher still made you do the calculations, or we had to learn from each other basic tips and things and tricks how to do calculations in our head when we didn't have calculators, all that stuff. Like we had to do that. And so even when we have those tools to this day, a good amount, I think, of millennials, older generation, and maybe even Gen Z to a degree, are still able to bust out math like just out of our head because of these basic tips and tricks. But Gen Alpha, I think that's going to skip them, in large, in mass, because they are the first generation. Even Gen Z wasn't born into technology as we know it. Millennials, computers, when we were younger, like these ultra wide monitors, like I have an ultra wide curve monitor and these smart computers and a Mac Mini and all this stuff. We didn't have all of this. We were gradually brought up into this. And Gen Z, as much as millennials as a whole tend to talk down on Gen Z, Gen Z was there with us. The gap is right there. If anything, shoot, some people are probably gonna think I'm Gen Z because I was born in 95. 95 is that very weird year where if you're like, hey, what years are for millennials? Like if you were born in what years, are you a millennial? And if you look it up, I think it'll say like 1980 to 1995. But then if you also look up what year for Gen Z, it'll say 1995 to like 2010 or something like that. Personally, I've always identified as a millennial, so I'm a millennial. Take it as you want. But my point being that Gen Z was right there. You know what I mean? They weren't far removed. They were probably some of our classmates. They were just 1, 2, 3 years below us, and that's that. They also had the opportunity to grow up with us as computers went from these big bulky things with the towers right there, the bulky monitors with the towers right there at the side of your desk, the old school Mac computers and all that stuff. They were right there with us for all that, and slowly integrated into, modern computing, from, music apps, social media, YouTube, streaming, Twitch, all this stuff. They grew up with us when it came to that stuff, right? Gen Alpha is the first generation to be born straight up into this stuff, to the point where you have toddlers in the single digits that know how to navigate social media apps probably better than their parents. Being in such a technologically advanced world, where we have gotten so used to instant gratification, where if we don't get something in 5 minutes, we're gonna flip or blow a casket, blow a gasket. There is going to be most likely much worse for them. From an intellectual standpoint, from again a social standpoint. social media has already done a number on self-esteem when it comes to depression, comparison, thinking someone else's life is better than yours because they're always out in Aruba or some foreign country every other 2 weeks or every other month, right? If not every month, just to find out that they probably are in the same boat in terms of not finding a job or where the case is, but they don't show that. Maybe their parents are bankrolling their experiences. They don't show that. You think they're doing everything completely by themselves. And it's like, no, they have a lot of stuff going on in the background that you don't see. You know what I mean? And we are people that grew up with this, that had time to kind of process and take it step by step. So I can only imagine the repercussions, mentally, socially, it'll have on Gen Alpha as they get older. And they kind of don't adapt. Like they may not even necessarily be mentally able to kind of push back against it the way we've had to learn to through therapy and other stuff. Like it might just be flat out normal for them, right? So I'm worried about that when it comes to that, both on an intellectual standpoint and a social standpoint. My final thoughts on this is my ultimate thing, and I'm not a parent, so I can't speak to anyone's parenting style and how much time every parent, every household makes for their kids and stuff like that. And personally, I know parents who make it a point to not use technology to teach their kids things. You know what I'm saying? They do things the old fashioned way with toys, write stuff down, all that stuff. So I know that's present. However, there seems to be a growing demographic of people, parents, who just rely on their kids being iPad kids, tablet kids. They let them use the calculators and all this stuff. They don't teach them how to use their brain to truly solve anything. They don't like growing up for me, when I was still living in California, when I was still back in Dago, and my mom was still married to my stepfather. My mom's, by the time I would get home, was usually still at work when she was still in the Navy. My step pops would be home by that time. And more times than not, if I would walk in, maybe get like a snack or some type of lunch, and he would kick me out until dinner time, and then I had to go to bed. He wouldn't let me sit and watch TV or play games all the time. He'll kick me out, and I would just play Yu-Gi-Oh by myself, or people could go outside, then cool. If it wasn't that, and even then he would still do this, but sometimes he would, before doing that, of course I had to do my homework and go over the homework with me. But he would do a thing where he would make me write my letters and everything, like you get that in school, but he would make me do it over and over again past the homework assignment. It wasn't like, okay, you trace the dotted line and all that stuff, and that's your homework. Cool, go and do whatever. It was like, no, like your A's look like crap, your B's look like crap, whatever the case is, and you're gonna keep doing them over and over until they don't look like chicken scratch, right? And so growing up, I got told a lot that my handwriting looks kind of like girly, but it was never meant as an insult from guys or girls, more so girls. Like they'll say that, but they'll be like your handwriting really is good for a guy, and it kind of looks similar to a girl's, but like it's actually legible. It doesn't look like chicken scratch like most guys, right? My mom had a friend, if you can say that, that would watch me at times and would make me and her daughter read at times, just stop watching TV and doing whatever and read for like an hour or so. Harry Potter, don't matter what it was. Um, handwriting again, or just do general homework, all that stuff, and would actually watch it and be like, do this again and all that stuff. And these are all military people, so they're also kind of strict with that. But you know what I'm saying? Like my point being that growing up, it was common almost anywhere I went where adults had to watch me to make me do stuff like that and to be on me academically and kind of, be like, you need to correct this and where the case is and this needs to be better. And, they could have just let it be. They could have let it stop at the homework assignment and that was that. And they're like, no, like you need to improve this just as a general skill. And my point being that they took initiative and they took my education into their hands. And I can't help but feel like there's a growing demographic of people, modern parents, where that's just not happening. Not completely. Again, I know parents where this does not apply, and I'm sure you guys do too. But that is a growing notion that I'm seeing. And I don't think it's wrong to believe that that's the case when you have a good amount of parents, or rather teachers, coming out saying, I teach 40, 50 some plus kids in a single class at a time, 3 to 4 plus classes a day. And this is a consistent issue. So there's no way, just like in this article said, why are kids going to school without already knowing how to read, at least on a basic level? And my growing concern, and this is not new. I want to be very clear. This is not new because I know some old heads where this applies to as well. where they apply that logic of essentially outsourcing your education or outsourcing your schooling, in that school is meant for that. It's meant for you to learn how to read, write, whatever. You should not have to come home and then I got to take charge of that as well, right? And I find that very problematic. Again, the way I grew up, even with people I didn't care for growing up, that was something they did right. And it was something that was consistent. They made a point to be like, hey, even though your homework is good and this and that, sometimes, if not fairly often, they will make us do more than that just to get the skill itself down, to learn those tricks. They would teach us those tricks and stuff like that, which ultimately empowered us to do well, down the line. They may have planted seeds that sprouted into other things and bloomed into other things in us, years later, whether we directly realize it or not. And it seems like the more these teachers come out, the more these articles come out, we're talking about literacy crisis, all that stuff, that must be going away to a decent degree for kids to not be performing as well as they have. A good amount of teachers are saying for every school year, they can give Fs to the majority of their students. To every student that deserves it, they can give Ds, Fs, whatever does not pass them, and they will still get pushed on to the next grade because at this point, they just need to create space for the next group of kids to come on up. On the news, back in the day, what would have gotten me an F back when I was in middle and high school would get these kids like a C or a C plus now at least. You know what I mean? Like the standards are drop, and it's not just made up. Like that was on the news. I forget which news network it was, but that was on the news. Like it's a legit thing. I don't know if that was pertaining to a specific region or a specific state or nationwide, but it's applying somewhere, right? So the standards are being dropped, and I think that's very problematic because that means parents are going to start looking at the letters. They're not going to look at the values. They're not going to look at the numbers, and they're going to be comfortable with it and say, "Hey, it passes you on to the next grade. So what?" You know what I'm saying?
Are we leading the world? I mean, we're the most developed country in the world. We've got the highest gross national product. We're at the top of the heap in many respects. But are we leading the world in some of those core elements like math and science and reading?
No, we're not even close. So, just so everyone's aware, as far as the education system goes, the United States actually ranks 25th amongst all developed nations when it comes to education in reading, math, and science combined. We just declined for the fifth year in a row when it comes to our university institutions on a worldwide ranking scale. It was the fifth year that we declined. And we've created a system where we're just cycling students through the system. And that
We have some researchers that do nothing but research. We do deep dives into the literature when we're looking for specifics. And as of midnight last night, of 79 countries, the US ranked 13th in reading, 18th in science, and 37th in math.
correct.
That's shockingly bad.
Well, I mean, as a professor, why should I have to compete with a smartphone for my students' attention? Why? And this is college level. So it's 10 times worse when you go through the K through 12 level where there's disrespect at the teachers on day in, day out basis. And, can't take away the phones. If you take away the phones, then parents they get upset and fights start breaking out.
That's going to lead to the kids, of course, being comfortable. They're not going to have a fire lit up under them unless they just naturally have that desire, or they maybe backpedal and correct it at some point in their life. They'll be very behind and will stay behind arguably forever, right? And even for people who play catch up later, that's still difficult because, like, even now for me, and I think I'm doing okay. I would love to be doing better, but I think I'm doing okay. And even for me, I've had to learn basic stuff, whether it's handy stuff and just basic skills with my car, my old car, and stuff like that. Other stuff that I felt like should have been emphasized earlier growing up. But as an adult, primarily when I was living by myself, I had to make time to learn that stuff. And it's much harder to make it a point to cover certain skills and to learn certain things that could have been learned years prior when you're an adult trying to just pay bills and keep your head afloat, especially in this inflation, in this job market, which seems like it's only going to get worse. The housing market only going to get worse from what we can tell, right? So, my whole thing is like take advantage of the time that you have. If as a parent, if you truly do not have the time because you work 2, 3 jobs to just take care of your kids and maintain the household, is there someone in their neighborhood or program in the neighborhood that can cover those bases for you? Do something extra outside of school. There needs to be something that can be done to be proactive about it. That mindset where it applies to, whom it applies to, that mindset of school is meant for you to learn how to read, write, where the case is. How is it that you don't know what this means? How is it you don't know what this word means? You don't know what this basic math. You don't know any of these things when you go to school. It's not about school. Education starts at home. And I'm going to talk about this probably in a different video. There is a thin but sharp line between education and schooling. Those are two different things. Someone that, gets degrees and stuff like me is a scholar. But someone can be a scholar and not be educated. Someone can be educated and not be a scholar. Now, some people will say, hey, I'm educated. I'm not a scholar, but like education, like I'm automatically better than you. But you got a good amount of people, like there's a reason why they say, generally speaking, if you have degrees versus people who don't have degrees, you're likely to do better in life, generally speaking. You know what I'm saying? Now, a lot of people lead with the whole thing of, getting degrees doesn't automatically mean you'll be successful. And we usually mean successful in terms of being millionaires, multimillionaires, and stuff like that. True. In either scenario, whether you have degrees or not, you're going to have to do something extra to reach that type of level, assuming you don't inherit that money. You don't have like an inheritance or something like that. It applies to both. But let's say if you don't start your side hustle or whatever to live out your rich dream until you're like 25, both the person that went to school and both the person that didn't go to school. And let's say you hustle and you don't blow up, or the money doesn't really, like the big money. You probably was doing good before, but the big money don't start kicking in until you're like, let's call it 35 years old. Maybe even 30 these days, because thanks to modern technology, things can happen very quickly, right? You can become a millionaire within a year these days if you just start something today. But let's say, matter of fact, let's cut that to 30. Let's say you don't start your side hustle and you keep it going consistently for 5 years. So 30 is when things are really starting to pop. You can quit your 9 to 5 comfortably. You can afford whatever penthouse and luxury cars and trips. You can take care of your family, all that stuff, right? Whether you're multi six figs to straight up millionaire, right? Anyone can reach that when they make the right moves and they put in the work, for sure. People who have degrees tend to, if when it comes to that 5-year gap that it takes you to reach there, that degree or those degrees you have will allow you to be more comfortable than someone who doesn't have one. And honestly, I can keep digging down this hole because it leads to a bigger issue. And again, when it comes to how people view education, because they're like, hey, 50 and a bunch of other people were able to become some of the biggest legends and icons of our time, and they don't have degrees, so why do I need one and all this other stuff? Degrees may not be the end all be all. True. But I'm telling you, there have been certain contract jobs and opportunities that only I was able to entertain that I tried to pass on to old coworkers that I liked. And I was like, hey, man, he was like, hey, we need people for this job involving PPP loan applications. You can work from home, all this stuff, and it pays a lot more and it's going to be less laborious than what we're doing here in this gas station. And I tried to put them on until the hiring manager was like, hey, man, if you bring those people on, they can come on. You know what I'm saying? We're not even going to interview you. And it was legit. The one detail was they need to have a degree. We don't even care about what degree they have. They need to have a degree. And that's where only I was able to entertain that type of opportunity. So, I'm not trying to speak from a superiority situation, but I'm saying, like, if you have kids that are failing at 4th grade, it's only going to be harder for them to make time to close this gap when they get older, primarily when they start, having to pay bills and be like full-fledged adults. Life is going to be a lot harder, even if they become millionaires at some point. That interim, that gap is going to be a lot harder and stressful for them when they have to keep working those kind of menial jobs and these other jobs that come around where they could make even so much as 25 an hour. That could be life-changing. I was making 15 or less at a gas station. That contract job was 20, I think it was like 21, 22 an hour, but it was like you can max out the OT. I got paid weekly every Friday, so I was making $3 to $4 grand a week when I maxed out overtime and stuff, right? Even when they cut it from 80 hours a week to 60 hours a week, still making a few grand a week, right? So you never know. So if you're struggling at this level just as a little kid, or if your kids are struggling at that level as little kids, and you don't make it a point to get your hands on and take control of their education, then it's only going to be harder later on, even when they wake up and acknowledge, like, hey, man, I need to get this together. But by that time, it's going to be tough to do so. Not impossible, but it's going to be harder than necessary when they could have been ahead of the curve already. I'll leave it there, guys. Hopefully this doesn't come off wrong, but that's my thoughts on it. And I really think we, as just, if you want to say community, just as individual people, you don't even have to be like a pillar in your community type thing. You don't even have to be that that type of person, because that's a job in itself. But even if it's your cousins, siblings, other relatives, a neighbor, if someone asks you for help, if you have the time, maybe that's a good chance for you to extend that. That can be a community service or something like that. But I think we all can do a little something to kind of clean this up. But primarily, if it's in your household, then I think you should be on it through and through. So yeah, guys, I'll go ahead and leave that here. Feel free to leave your thoughts, comments in the comment section below. What do you guys think? Do you think this is something worth like stressing and something we should prioritize? Do you think we should just let people do what they want to do in their households? Which ultimately the answer to that is yes. But do you think this is something that should be brought to the forefront in terms of like, as a demographic, as a community, whatever community you come from, is this something that we should tackle, or do you think we're too deep in the hole to really do anything about it? Go ahead and leave that form in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.